And by the way, I'm Dennis Kucinich, campaign manager, but I'm not the important one here. I want to make an introduction. This is a woman you know and love. You know her from being a great actress, humanitarian. I want to introduce Cheryl Hines, Biden Kennedy's wife.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say hello and thank you for being here today. You're going to hear from my beautiful husband in just a moment. We've been traveling all around South Carolina and have had the best time meeting people. Your communities are beautiful. And you have the best sweet tea I've ever had. I think for every meal we have had grits and sweet tea. And I've loved every second of it. So thank you for hosting us. I can't wait for you to hear from, I guess, I want to call you Bobby, but I should call you Robert Kennedy Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robert Kennedy Jr.
Thank you, Dennis, and thanks to all of you for your patience. Can you hear me in the way back there? Yeah, raise your hand if you can hear me. Can you hear back in the corner there? You cannot hear me. We turned it up. How about now? You can hear me back there now? Great. Well, it was really good meeting you all. While I'm speaking, you might want to look at the picture they took, and if they didn't get your good side, come back afterwards and we'll try it again. I'm very, very happy to be here. As Cheryl said, we've been traveling all over the state of South Carolina. We've found incredible support in the state, and we've eaten a lot of amazing food. We've seen some beautiful, beautiful places. I was, a week ago, we did an opening of our headquarters in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I did, at the end, there was a crowd about almost this size. And I did at the end selfies with everybody. And the last kid who waited in line was a 22-year-old boy who told me that he had never taken part in politics before. This was his first campaign, the first time that he was going to vote. And the reason that he wanted to work for the campaign is that he wanted to feel hope for his own life, and he wanted to feel proud of his country. That same week, a poll came out that showed that in 1985, 85% of the Americans between 18 and 35 years old said that they were proud of the United States of America. The same poll taken last week showed that same group of young people today, only 42% said they are proud of the United States of America. And that was one of the most heartbreaking data points that I've seen, because I grew up privileged to believe that I lived in a country that was blessed by God, and we were an exemplary nation, and that we had a key part in history to play. But this boy is worried primarily about his future. He's worried that he will not be able to pay off his student loans. My wife Cheryl, who came from North Central Florida, worked very hard all her life and never had any money. She didn't pay off. She finally got a job for Curb Your Enthusiasm for her TV show, and at 35 years old, she paid back her student loan. Well, she got very lucky, but this kid is paying 7 times for his college education what I paid. And for that whole generation of kids are going to grow up with that burden on their lives, on their mood, on their feeling of self-worth, and on their prospects in the future. This kid said to me that he doesn't know if he'll ever be able to own a home. The America that I grew up in, everybody understood that was just part of the American promise, part of the American dream, that if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, that you would have enough money to buy a home, to pay your mortgage, to support your family, to go on a summer vacation, and to put something aside for retirement from one job. Today, I'm running through Americans all over this country who have 2 or 3 jobs between the couple and cannot make ends meet. They sit around the kitchen table and look at their bills, and they do not know how they're going to pay them. And the price of homes has gone up just in the last 2 years, from $215,000 average to $450,000, and the mortgage on those homes is now up to 7%. So this kid is paying about 10 times what he would have paid 3 years ago for a home. And why have they gone up? One of the reasons is inflation. I'm paying for all the wars, the $8 trillion we paid up for wars that we've lost in the last 20 years, useless regime change wars, $16 trillion from the cost of COVID, and another $8 trillion from stock buybacks, which are bankrupting the middle class in this country and shifting wealth upward. The other reason is that there's 3 giant corporations, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which own 88% of the S&P 500, 3 companies. And they've now decided they want to buy all the single-family homes in America. Them and the Chinese. So 10% of new homes are being bought, 10% of that group is being bought by Chinese. The rest of it mainly by those companies. But if we stay on track that we're on right now, 60% of the single-family homes in this country will be owned by corporations by 2030. So all of you have heard of stories of kids who cannot buy a home and are moving in with their parents, college-age kids or college graduates. You also hear stories about somebody who's about to buy a home. They have the money for it. They got the homes picked out. Somebody swoops in the last minute with a cash offer and takes that home off the market. Well, those are the companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. I'm running against 2 presidential candidates who both served 1 term in office. And they're both running on this, the idea that they brought prosperity to our country. And that's why we should re-elect them. But as I go around this country, and I go around all over the country on the campaign, but even before that, I represent people in West Virginia who were poisoned by DuPont, in Ohio who were poisoned by 3M. In Columbiana County, I'm representing 1,000 families whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I represent some 40,000 families all over the country who've lost or have a family member who got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from Monsanto's Roundup. So I end up a lot of my life sitting at kitchen tables with families and understanding what their issues are. And I'm seeing a level of desperation in this country, a level of depression, of mental illness that is attached to the economic anxieties that people have, of alcoholism, of drug addiction, all of these indicia of social deterioration that people are terrified, and it is the kind of desperation that I saw in Latin America when I was a boy, but I never expected to see here in the United States of America. Today, the average income in the United States is $5,000 less than the cost of living. And the cost of basic human needs, of food, of transportation, of shelter. Oh, how are Americans making up for that $5,000 they're putting it on their credit card. Last week, we passed a milestone, $1 trillion in credit card debt in this country of individual Americans. Nothing like this has ever happened before. $1 trillion. Those companies are charging 22% interest on that credit card debt. If the mafia did that to you, it would be called loan sharking. If the banks do it and the credit card companies, it's just business as usual. And who do you think owns those banks and the credit card companies? 3 companies: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. These companies are strip mining the wealth from the American middle class and sending it upward to their owners and their shareholders. The CEO of BlackRock is a man named Larry Fink, who sits on the board of the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum says that the ideal future is what they call the Great Reset. And the motto of the Great Reset is you will all own nothing and you will be happy. Well, they are on their way to making sure that the first part of that gets fulfilled. But they're going to own everything if we allow this to continue. And I lived at a time, I grew up at a time, that economists and social scientists and historians call the Great Prosperity. The opposite of the Great Reset was the Great Prosperity. It was a period of time in American world history when the American middle class became the greatest economic engine generator that has ever been seen in human history. Our country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. And people looked at us not only for our wealth with admiration, but they looked to us for our stature, for our moral authority, for our leadership. Countries all over the world wanted American leadership. They didn't want bullying, and they knew the difference. But they looked at us as a moral icon. And they wanted our products. When I was a kid and traveled to Europe with my dad or Latin America, everybody would come up to the street and say, "Can I buy your blue jeans from you?" They wanted transistor radios from our country. They wanted RCA controllers, and they wanted our automobiles, which were the best automobiles in the world. Everything we made, other people wanted. When I went in 1964, a year after my uncle was killed, I went with my father and mother and 3 of my siblings. I have 11 siblings. The 4 oldest of us went to visit Poland. Poland at that time was a communist government, and the government did not want us visiting their country. My father went without invitation and against their advice. And when we went to the country, they didn't want the Polish people to know that we were in Poland, so they blacked out all news of our visit in the newspaper. And in fact, we went one day to visit a orphanage in Warsaw. And it was a very famous, large orphanage. And before we went, we passed the United States. We packed up gifts of U.S. products to give to the orphans. But when we got to the orphanage, the government had removed all the children to make sure that we had no contact with the Polish people. 2 days later, we went to Krakow, and we visited the Cardinal of Krakow, who was a living saint. Everybody knew that he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church as soon as he died, and he was in fact. He had courageously stood up to communism. He had been tortured. He had been jailed. He became an inspiration for the Polish people. He inspired a resurgence of the Catholic faith in Poland. And we sat for a couple of hours waiting to visit him in in the cathedral, and then we talked to him. We spent 2 hours talking with him. When we went in that cathedral, the square at the plaza of Krakow, it's a giant plaza, was empty. Nobody knew we were there. But when we came out, there were 1 million people waiting for us. They surrounded our car. My father pulled us off up on the roof of the embassy car, and he gave a speech. And for 2 hours, they kept us in that square, singing to us. They lifted the car up. They sang Sto lat, which means may you live forever. They sang the Polish national anthem, which was illegal. It was a criminal act to sing that song at that time. They sang it again and again and again to us. There was an electricity in the crowd like nothing I'd ever seen. There were tears coming down the faces of people, and this passion and love for the United States of America. And on that same trip, we went to Greece, we went to France, we went to Germany and Britain, and we got the same reactions there. People loved our country. And that was good for our national security. It was good for our economy. It was good for our leadership. And one of the reasons for this passion for the United States at that time was my uncle's determination to keep the country out of war. He said that when an African child or a Latin American child hears the term United States of America, he didn't want them to think of a man in military uniform with a gun. He wanted them to think of a Peace Corps volunteer. He wanted them to think of the Alliance for Progress, the Kennedy Mill Program, USAID, which was meant to end run the oligarchs and the military junta and help grow the middle class in those countries, many of which were new countries, former colonial possessions. And he managed to keep our country out of war. He was asked by one of his two best friends, Ben Bradley, who was the editor of the Washington Post, "What do you want on your gravestone?" And my uncle told him he kept the peace. That's what he wanted as his epithet. He said the primary job of the President of the United States was to keep the country out of war. And he managed to do that during his term. He managed to never send a combat veteran abroad to die. And they wanted him, he was surrounded by military brass, by an intelligence apparatus, and wanted him to go to war. He managed to keep the country out of Laos. He negotiated a deal there with the Soviet Union and the Pentagon. Daniel Ellsberg later said the Pentagon considered that treachery to our country because they wanted to go into that war so badly. He realized very early on during the Bay of Pigs crisis that he was surrounded by a military apparatus and military brass and intelligence apparatus that considered war not only inevitable but advisable. And that we're desperate to get him to go to war. He kept us out of Cuba in 1960, during the Bay of Pigs in 61, and again during the missile crisis in 62. He kept us out of Berlin during the Checkpoint Charlie crisis in 61, and he kept us out of Vietnam. He was surrounded, even his closest advisors, people like General Maxwell Taylor, Averell Harriman, Bob McNamara, people who he really loved, were telling him, you have to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government is going to collapse. And he said, it's not our war. They have to create their own government. They have to fight their own wars. It's not up to the United States to do that. He ended up sending 16,000 military advisors. They were Green Berets. They were not technically allowed to participate in combat, but some of them did that anyway. It was fewer troops, incidentally. And he sent to Oxford, Mississippi, to get one black man, James Meredith, into Ole Miss. And then in October 22nd, 1963, 1 month to the day before he died, he found out that a Green Beret had died in Vietnam. one of those advisors. And he asked his aide, Walt Rostow, for a casualty list. And Walt Rostow came back and told him 75 American soldiers had died in Vietnam. And he said, that's too many, I want them all home. And that afternoon he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all 16,000 troops home by the end of 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home in December of 63, a month later. 30 days after that to the day, he was murdered. And a week after that, President Johnson remanded that order. And within a year, President Johnson sent 250,000 troops over there. Martin Luther King, in 1968, transformed himself into the leading peace activist in this country. Many of his fellow leaders in the civil rights movement said, we should stay in our lane, we shouldn't get involved with the peace movement. And he said, we cannot separate. We cannot have justice and peace at home and be committing violence abroad. If we make ourselves into an imperial nation abroad, we will be an oppressive garrison state, a security state, a surveillance state at home. It's the same thing that Eisenhower warned 3 days before my uncle took office, and I was at his inauguration. The outgoing President Eisenhower made the most important speech in American history. He warned our country against the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would devour and destroy American democracy, that would rob the middle class of its wealth, that would empower an elite, a plutocracy, and that would destroy the institutions of our democracy. And Martin Luther King started speaking about that in April 1968. He was killed. My father campaigned against the war in '68. He entered that presidential race against the president of his own party to stop the war, and 2 months after Dr. King, he was killed. And these series of traumas, my uncle's death, Dr. King's death, Malcolm X's death, my father's death, the Vietnam War itself, 9/11, and then COVID, the lockdown, pushed us down. Those traumas pushed us down that road that President Eisenhower had warned us against. And since 2001, as I said, we have spent $8 trillion on war. If we had taken, and here's what we got for that. Iraq, where most of it was spent, is worse off than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. We killed 675,000 to 1 million Iraqis. We forced Iraq into a proxy position with Iran, which is exactly what we've been trying to prevent. Iraq is not even a coherent nation anymore. It's a battle between Shia and Sunni death squad. We created ISIS. We had spillover war in Syria. We drove 2 million Syrians into, and other refugees from Libya, another war that we had in Syria, into Europe, and we destabilized every democracy in Europe for the next 2 generations. Brexit is a direct result of our Iraq adventures, and Libya and Yemen and Pakistan, a direct result. The rioting that you see now, the rioting that's going in France, was a direct result of that intervention and that invasion, that migrant invasion. But what could we have done with that $8 trillion if we kept it here? We could have paid off all student debt. We could have kept Social Security alive and solvent for 75 years. We could have paid for child care for every American family that needs to go to work, have daycare for their children. We could have built a high-speed rail system across this country the way that the Chinese did with their money. And we could have done many, many other things that we need, but we spent $8 trillion on useless wars. And now we're in Iraq, or we're in Ukraine doing the same thing. We already committed $113 billion in Ukraine. Now, this is a war that never needed to happen. Russians tried twice to settle this war. In fact, the Russians then tried to advance an agreement called the Minsk Accords in 2018 and 2019, which would have, when Donbass voted to leave Ukraine and join Russia, Putin said, I don't want you to. Let's do it. Let's keep Ukraine as one entity, but let's make sure that the people, the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass are protected, that they can speak their own language and practice their own culture, and that NATO will not go into Ukraine. We advanced, we negotiated with Germany, with France, and with the Ukrainian government, the Minsk Accords, which would have done that. It was a very good deal. Vladimir Zelensky won the presidency in 1970, a comedian and actor who ran for president with no political experience and won 70% of the vote because he promised to sign the Minsk Accords. And what happened? Neocons in the Biden White House told him that he could not sign it. They wanted that war with Russia. And we now know, as we recently have learned, that in March of 2022, the Israelis and the Turks negotiated another agreement that did the same thing, and that Zelensky signed the agreement, the initial. The Russians signed it, and they were leaving the Ukraine. They were pulling their troops out. President Biden said, Boris Johnson over there to force Zelensky to tie up that agreement, to tear up that agreement. And since then, we now know we've killed 500,000 Ukrainian kids. My son went over and fought in Ukraine on the side of the Ukrainians. And most of the people that he fought for are now dead. 500,000 mothers who've lost their kids for no reason. Oh, we've committed $113 billion to that war. And we did that in March of this year. Let me tell you something else that happened in March. I have a friend, I've represented commercial fiction in all of my career. I started out on the Hudson, cleaning up the Hudson, suing polluters, protect the fishing industry. And I've represented commercial fiction for 40 years. One of my close friends is a commercial fisherman, and Keith Amato, who's from the Cape, fished out of wealthy Chatham and Provincetown. And he worked hard all his life. He's now on disability. His son runs the business, but he has no pension. He depends on food stamps. He was getting $283 a month in food stamps. But that money, and the value of those food stamps, because of the inflation of paying for the wars, the value of those food stamps have dropped 38% in 2 years. But the real value has dropped even more because the cost of basic food stuff, chicken, dairy, and egg, has increased by 76% during that period. So his food stamps were 76% less. And even before March, he was telling me that he was having to buy cheaper ingredients in order to get through the grocery store line. Well, on March 1st, he got a robocall from the government saying, your food stamps are now being cut to $23 a month. 90% cut. 30 million Americans got that call. 15 million Americans were told that month that they were being cut from Medicare. That same month, the Fed printed $300 billion extra dollars unanticipated to pay for the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. And President Biden tipped off to Ukraine a contribution for $113 billion. Oh, we have plenty of, if we kept that $113 billion here, we wouldn't have to cut one food stamp for Americans, and we wouldn't have had to cut anybody from Medicare. So we made a choice. And the difficulty for me is we always seem to have plenty of money for the bank bailouts and the military-industrial complex. But for poor Americans, for working-class Americans, for people in need in this country who have worked their whole lives, we don't have that money. And now, but Mitch McConnell, and by the way, President Biden this week is asking Congress for an additional $24 billion for Ukraine, but he's tying it to the Hawaii aid package. So he's holding Hawaiian aid hostage for another $24 billion for Ukraine. Now, when Mitch McConnell was asked, why are we sending all this money over to Ukraine when we have poor people who are suffering in this country, we have a crisis here? He said, well, the money's not actually going to Ukraine. It's really going to U.S. military contractors like Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed, who are making all the weapons that we're selling to Ukraine. So it's really just a money laundering scheme to U.S. military contractors. Well, who do you think owns every single one of those military contractors? 3 companies: BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So this is how they're stripping our money. I'm going to tell you one other story because I was in Iowa this week, and one of the big issues in Iowa is there's 3 pipelines that are now being built in Iowa, $3,300 miles. These pipelines are not oil or gas pipelines. They're carbon capture pipelines. Now, I've been an environmentalist my whole life, and a lot of you probably don't believe in climate change, and that's fine. I believe in it. I think it's existential. But I also believe that carbon capture is a hoax. It's a boondoggle. It's a way of fooling the public into making us think the government is doing something, but it's really just shifting wealth to the super rich. And it has no benefit for reducing the amount of carbon. Now, these 3 pipelines, they are using eminent domain. These are owned by 3 companies. They're using eminent domain to condemn the land of the farmers, the best farmland in America, the most productive farmland in the world. And they're condemning that land to build these 3 pipelines that are going to pick up a very pure form of CO2 created by ethanol plants. And they're going to bring it up to, they say they're going to do deep well injection and bury that carbon forever. But I've seen these projects before, and number 1, they don't work. Number 2, they don't work on either end. The last one they made for Archer Daniel Midland only captured 3% of the carbon from that company. And what do they do? And North Dakota has already told them, you can't do deep well injection in our state. But they're going forward anyway. You know why? Because what they're really going to use that carbon for, they're going to inject it into the exhausted wells, oil wells, at the Bakken crude fields to make those oil wells last another 10 or 20 years. So it is the opposite of reducing carbon. They're actually going to create more carbon. But the value to these 3 companies over a 10-year period through tax credits, which are direct payments from you and me, is $173 billion. But those 3 companies can have more than the Ukraine war. $173 billion. You know the biggest of those 3 companies are? BlackRock. Oh, 80% of the people in Iowa oppose that pipe. 46 counties, through which that pipe runs have sent protests to the Senate. But the individuals who are making the decision to allow that pipeline to condemn the land and go ahead have received $1.6 million in campaign contributions from the three companies that are building those pipes. And all the people who are making those decisions are people who say they do not believe in human-induced climate change. So it's clear it's just a hoax. It is a transfer of, it is a way of strip mining wealth from the American public and our equity and shifting it to the richest billionaires on the planet. And that's what we see all around us. And I've spent my lifetime fighting large corporations, fighting these kind of fixed deals, fighting corporate capture. And when I get in the White House, I'm going to unravel this. I'm going to kill this project because I can use FERC to kill it. I'm going to unravel the empire abroad, close a lot of those 800 bases. I'm going to bring that money back here. The billion-dollar stealth bombers that can't fly in the rain. With one of those bombers, we can build 1,000 schools in this country. We can paint the inside of the schools. We can buy computers for the children. We can pay for their education. And that's what I'm going to do as president. And let me just tell you one last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to create a housing boom in this country by doing two things. One is I'm going to use the IRS to make it impossible for large corporations to buy up our single-family homes. Number two, I'm going to create a new 3% mortgage. And the way I'm going to do that, without creating any more debt for our country, I'm going to sell 3% mortgage bonds to the financing those bonds, the private investors, tax free. So they'll get a 3%, it will be beneficial for them because they're paying 3% as tax free. It will finance Americans who want to buy a single family home. It will only be available to Americans, and we'll start out making them available only to teachers in this country. Because the teachers do that. And the way that we do that is, imagine if you wanted to get a mortgage, and you're a young kid, you can't afford it, and because you don't have a good credit rating, they give you a high rate. But what if you had a rich uncle who will co-sign that mortgage for you? And then you can get a very low rate because he's very rich. And your credit rating doesn't matter, so it'll become available to you. Well, I'm going to make Uncle Sam all of your rich uncle. So that Uncle Sam will guarantee that 3% mortgage. And instead of paying 7% for mortgage, you'll pay 3%. It will take $1,000 off your monthly mortgage fees. And it will make you competitive with BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and the Chinese. Because this is only going to be available to American citizens who need who are trying to buy a single family home. And we can do that, as I said, without driving up the debt. We should have done this years and years ago, but as soon as I get into office, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to create a housing boom in this country. The same way that we created a housing boom in 1945, when the troops came home, the GI Bill, and these other government incentives made it easy for them to buy homes. And that was the beginning of that 50 years of great prosperity. And it's the beginning of a new era of prosperity in this country, and we're going to arrest the decline that we're seeing all over this country. So that's one of the many plans that I have. You can go to the website to read the rest, and I'm very, very grateful to you for your support, for coming out here and sitting patiently. I apologize for all the problems that we had. I really enjoyed meeting you, and I'm grateful to all of you, and I'm happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. What I would ask, if you have a question, I would ask if you line up right here, and we'll take one at a time. But if you have a question, please come forward. We'll get to as many as we can. Right now, I think we have about 25 minutes, Mr. Kennedy. I think that's right. We have about 25 minutes for questions. In the meantime, the website is kennedy24.com, or for South Carolina, kennedysc.org. I would like you to go there. Now today, when you leave, make sure you take a sign. If you want to make a contribution to the campaign, you're welcome to do that too. We'd love to have your participation at any level that works for you. We are so grateful to each and every one of you for being here. Now, without further ado, Mr. Kennedy, may we go to the first question? Okay. Please go ahead.
My name is Robert Altman. President Kennedy, I have read your book, Real Anthony Fauci, great book. I appreciate all the lawsuits you have brought in favor of the people for clean air and clean water. I'm wondering, in your administration, will you reorganize EPA and the FDA away from the pharmaceutical industry? Will you stop Roundup from being put on our crops? And will you get a choice, freedom of choice for women on birth or no birth?
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question, Mr. Kennedy.
In answer to your last question, I think every abortion is a tragedy, but I think we need to trust women. And I've been fighting for medical freedom and bodily autonomy for all of my life. And I've been probably the lead fighter on those issues, and I think that applies to all of them. I don't think the government has the competence to interfere in our own medical decisions about what happens to our bodies. But I also understand both sides of the abortion argument. I've seen pictures of late-term abortions that are horrifying, and my family has stood on the issue. And I don't think anybody should be disrespected for their views on this issue. It's a difficult issue. It's difficult for all of us. I believe ultimately the only good choice, or the only choice we have, is to trust women. On the issue of, I've sued all of these agencies: EPA, NIH, CDC, FDA, the USDA, the DOT, all of them, and all of them are experiencing agency capture. So all of them are essentially become sock puppets of the industry they're supposed to regulate. Because when you sue an agency like this, you get a PhD in how they work and the corruption. And you're right to bring up Monsanto. When we sued Monsanto, I was part of the trial team for 3 trials. And then, we settled the suits for $13 billion with 40,000, or now about 50,000 plaintiffs. People who got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from using Roundup. A group of discovery documents that we got during those trials were correspondence between the head of the pesticide division at EPA and the top executives of Monsanto. That man's name was Jess Rowland, and he was the head of the pesticide division. What we didn't know, what the public didn't know, was that for at least a decade, he had been privately working for Monsanto, although he was collecting a paycheck from us. And this, unfortunately, is the rule at all of these agencies. There are people who are critically placed in those agencies, and I can tell you who they are in many of these agencies. I can tell you exactly who they are in CDC, at NIH, at FDA. People who are supposed to be working for us, but they're secretly working for pharma. And I can tell you who they are at USDA. USDA is an agency that was started to help the small farmer in this country and to produce and to encourage the production of wholesome food. Their actual function is to do the opposite, is to destroy the small farmer to reward the big packing industry, the consolidation of the retail industry, the consolidation of the seed industry. 95% of our seeds are owned by one company, Monsanto. And so I'm going to unravel that. I'm going to make these agencies do what they're supposed to do. I'm going to go to NIH on week 1. And NIH has a $42 billion budget. It has 56,000 scientists, researchers with funding. And I'm going to say to them, we're going to give infectious disease a little break for about a decade. We're going to start studying chronic disease. We're going to start asking the question, why are our kids the sickest kids in the world? Where did the autism epidemic come from? It went from 10,000 in my generation to 31 in every 34 kids today. Where did food allergies suddenly appear from? Where did all these autoimmune, where did eczema suddenly appear? Where did all these autoimmune diseases, juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, lupus, why did they all suddenly appear in 1989? Why is that the change here? What happened that year? We know that these epidemics are not, we went from having 6% of our kids having chronic disease to about 60%. And no other nation has it. One of the reasons we did so badly in COVID, we have only 4.2% of the population, but we had 16% of the COVID deaths globally. One of the reasons for that is we have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world. We have, and CDC said the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. So they had obesity, they had diabetes, they had asthma, and other diseases. Why do we have them in this country and other countries don't? And we need to, and why isn't NIH research? Well, we know why. We know there's a limited number of culprits, and there's a very famous doctor called Phil Landrigan, who was at Mount Sinai, one of the most important toxicologists in the world, and I've used him as an expert in a lot of my lawsuits. And he's asked the question, what happened in 1989? And he said, and he's come down to about 11 different culprits. And one of those is glyphosate from Roundup, which goes along that timeline. Another is neonicotinoid pesticides. Another is atrazine. Another is PFOAs and PFAS, these forever chemicals that around that time were put in all of our kids' pajamas, they're flame retardant, and they were put in all of our furniture. And they're now in our water supply all over our country, pursuing now to get them out. High fructose corn syrup is another culprit. And the vaccine schedule went from 3 vaccines to 72 vaccines, so that's got to be, and 1989 was a big change here. So that's got to be a potential culprit too. Cell phone radiation is a potential culprit, so there's a number of them, but there's a limited number. Landrigan can only come up with about 11. Why don't we know the answer to that question? It's simple science. And they won't do it because they know that the end of each one of those threads is a big shot that nobody wants to cross. Oh, when I get in there, we're going to find out exactly, immediately, what's causing it, and we're going to eliminate those exposures. Today, we spend $1.3 trillion on the military. We were told in 1992, the Soviet Union collapsed. We were told we're going to get a peace dividend. Military expenditures at that point were $660 billion. We were told they were going to go down to $200 billion. That was plenty to protect our country. Instead, they've gone to $1.3 trillion annually. But the biggest expense is chronic disease. We spend $4.3 trillion annually on healthcare in this country, 3 or 4 times per capita what any European country spends, and our healthcare outcomes are worse than anyone's. We have worse health outcomes than Mongolia and Cuba in Costa Rica. Why is that? It's chronic disease. We have more chronic disease than anybody. 80% of our healthcare costs are going to chronic disease. When my uncle was president, only 6% of Americans had chronic disease. And the percentage that we spent on healthcare of GDP was 1/20th we're spending today, and we are much healthier. What my aim is to get that percentage back to 6%. And everybody, the Democrats and Republicans argue about how do we pay for our healthcare system. Should it be Obamacare? Should it be Medicare for all? Should it be a public option? Should it be the HMO system? How do you pay for it? But all of those, and they tear each other apart, figuring out who's going to pay. But all of those options are just putting the paycheck, sending the bill. Who do you send the bill to? It's like shifting deck chairs around on the Titanic. The real issue is, how can we actually reduce those healthcare costs? The only way to do that, the obvious way, is to reduce the amount of chronic disease that our children have. And that's what I'm going to do as president. If any of you, I'm sure, let's raise your hand if you have somebody in your family who is affected by chronic disease. And you see that. It's at least 50 or 60% of the people in this room. We need to end this. When you are affected by it, the families that are affected, their careers are injured, their relationships are injured, their careers are derailed, their earning potential is their whole focus is on helping that child, in some cases keeping that child alive. And we need to take that burden away from the American people. And we need to figure out what is causing it, and we need to eliminate those exposures.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next question, please.
Carlton Barber with In Your Faith Ministries. This is a South Carolina plus a North Carolina question. The Lumbee tribe, Mr. Donald promised to help the Lumbee tribe, largest tribe east of the Mississippi, gain federal recognition. For years we have state benefits, but we are finding that state benefits are not enough. So a lot of Lumbee Native American Indians, as well as South Carolina tribes, are migrating to other states just to be able to do what they need to do to provide for themselves. So the question is, would you be in support of looking at tribes that deserve federal recognition that would help them? And there's casinos being built by tribes in North Carolina. The casinos would also boost the economy.
I spent for about 20 years, I spent 20% of my time, my professional time, representing the tribes in Canada, in the United States, and in Latin America. And my uncle was involved in getting the tribes recertified, and I will fight very, very hard to make sure that those tribes, the tribes that are real tribes, that lost their certification, they were trying to destroy all the tribes, that we get them that certification back.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next question, please.
Jerry Jacobs, Marion County Democratic Party. Mr. Kennedy, I have a very simple question. Me, along with thousands of other disabled veterans, would love to know why it take the veteran administration so many years just to hear a disabled veteran appeal. I know, and we know, veterans have waited almost 10 years to have their appeals heard. Why the process taking so long?
I had a hearing problem.
Okay, let's try it again.
And that's you.
A lot of other veterans would love to know why does it take the Veterans Administration so many years to hear a disabled veteran appeal? Why the process taking so long?
Veterans Appeal process, which of course is a nightmare. Go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
You mean, why does the federal appeal process take so long? Yeah, I wish I did that too, because I'm waiting for so many appeals right now. I have, and also, depending on the circuit, they have different rules. And and they have different priorities, and some of the circuits don't discipline the judges at all. I'm waiting on appeals I'm waiting on an appeal on my Facebook page.
Excuse me, Mr. Kennedy, I think it's a veteran and he's talking about what you just said, but also about the fact that the Veterans Administration, am I right? Yeah, the Veterans Administration is so slow in addressing the cases that veterans present. Is that it? Okay.
That is inexcusable, is because they don't have the judges. And I will appoint the judges and make sure that veterans get a hasty adjudication. We're behind on all our judges. I mean, one of the reasons that we have this big problem at the border is because we don't have any asylum judges. So it takes 7 years to get a case in front of asylum, and the people who are petitioning for asylum at the border are let into the country, and they're given a court date 7 years from now. And that's inexcusable. I'm going to fill those posts, and I'm going to fill the posts of the Veterans Administration to make sure that our veterans would sacrifice for our country and get a hasty adjudication and can get what they're entitled to.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Thank you. Okay, next question, veteran.
How you doing, Mr. Kennedy? We appreciate you coming down to Florence, South Carolina. Appreciate you taking the time to come and share your view with us. I have a question that I want to ask you. It's just been circulating. And I heard you talk about one-time President Biden, one-time President Mr. Trump. My question is, do you feel that President Biden won the election fair and honest? Do you feel that former President Trump lost the election? I want to know your opinion. Do you feel he really lost the election?